An infertile millionaire showed up at his ex's wedding with homeless twins and left everyone stunned. He was a millionaire with everything except a family. She was his ex-fiancée who left him because he couldn't give her the one thing she wanted most: children. But when Graham West walked into her high society wedding hand in hand with two mysterious, homeless twin girls, the entire room froze. Who were they? Why did they look so polished, so poised, and why did they cling to him like he was their father? What started as a scandalous act of revenge would soon unravel into a truth no one saw coming. Stay tuned. This is a story that will change how you define love, loyalty, and family. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The invitation looked innocent, tastefully done in ivory cardstock, edged in silver foil, with a delicate floral embossing that only money could afford. But to Graham Whitaker, it might as well have been a loaded weapon. He read the names printed in calligraphy again, disbelievingly: Julianne Moore and Benjamin Astor. Cordially invite you to join them on the celebration of their marriage. His ex-fiancée? The woman who once whispered in his ear about building a family together. The woman who left him when she realized he couldn't give her children. The pain wasn't new. It had been 10 years since a rare congenital issue ended any possibility of Graham ever becoming a father. He'd told Julianne early in the relationship, trying to be honest. At first, she said she loved him regardless. That family could mean many things. But the closer they got to setting a date, the more distant she became. Until the night she placed his engagement ring on the marble counter and walked out into the rain. Now, here she was, marrying a man with a pedigree, a jawline sculpted by privilege, and undoubtedly the ability to reproduce. Graham stared out from his penthouse, overlooking downtown Chicago. The city glittered beneath a dusky sky, its lights cold and distant. Behind him, the invitation lay open on his coffee table, like a wound that hadn't healed right. He was 48, billionaire, powerful, alone. "You should go," said Derek, his closest friend and longtime advisor, when Graham showed him the invitation the next morning over espresso. "It's not about her. It's about proving to yourself that you've moved on. Go. Show up confident, refined, untouchable." "What would I even say?" Graham muttered. "Hello, Julianne. Good to see you found someone who can give you what I couldn't." Derek had just raised an eyebrow. "Or you show her what she lost. That you're more than what she walked away from." Graham didn't answer. But the seed had been planted. That night, still restless, he left his building to clear his mind. Walking without direction through the city's winding streets. It had rained. Light drizzle misting the sidewalks and leaving halos around streetlights. As he turned a corner by a shuttered bookstore, something made him pause. There, under the overhang of a closed cafe, were two children, girls no older than 8, twins, soaked from the rain, shivering under a thin blanket, clinging to each other like castaways. They didn't beg, they didn't speak. They simply existed, quietly, in a world that had forgotten them. He stared, unable to move. One of the girls looked up, locking eyes with him. Defiant, unflinching. The kind of look that dared the world to dismiss her again. And just like that, the billionaire who had everything but a family felt something shift in his chest. "I'm not trying to bother you," he said gently, stepping closer, voice low. Just, are you safe? The girl said nothing. But her twin, smaller, peeked out from beneath the blanket and whispered, "We're cold." It was instinct. Or maybe it was fate. He led them to a nearby diner, bought them hot soup, listened as they told him only what they were willing to share. Their names were Hazel and Hope. They had no home, no parents, but they had each other. That night, lying awake, Graham thought about the wedding invitation on his counter, thought about Julianne's words the night she left, how she wanted a man who could give her children, a future, a real family. Then he thought about those two brave girls, and for the first time in years, he felt something more powerful than pain. He felt purpose, and so a new idea formed, one that was impulsive, outrageous, maybe even a little unhinged. But it was his. What if he brought the twins with him to the wedding, not out of revenge, not to spite Julianne, but to show her and himself that family wasn't defined by biology. That love could choose you, even when life had denied you. What happened next would shock everyone at that wedding, including Graham himself. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful, emotional stories like this one to life. Stick around. You won't want to miss what happens next. Graham didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room, lights dimmed, the twin girls asleep in the guest bedroom he never used. The silence in the penthouse was different now, not empty, but full of something unexpected. He wasn't a man prone to rash decisions. Every deal, every merger, every risk he'd ever taken had been calculated with precision. But bringing home two homeless girls with no legal papers, no knowledge of their background, and no plan beyond a gut instinct, that was uncharted territory. And yet, for once, it felt right. The morning sunlight crept across the floor as Graham poured himself a coffee and glanced toward the hallway. To his surprise, the smaller of the twins appeared, hair tousled, eyes blinking against the brightness. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. "Is it okay if we stay a little longer?" He knelt so they were eye level, his voice soft. "You don't have to ask permission to be safe, Hope." A moment later, Hazel appeared behind her, arms crossed, more guarded. She didn't say anything, but her eyes searched him, as if testing whether the kindness he offered came with conditions. "I was thinking," Graham said, rising to his full height. "You've had a rough time. Maybe a proper breakfast, pancakes, and after that we can talk about what's next." Hazel didn't respond right away. Then, after a long pause, she gave a slow nod. That small gesture carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. A private chef would have been easy to call, but Graham made the pancakes himself, awkwardly flipping them, nearly burning the first batch. Hope giggled. Hazel tried not to, but failed. That sound, light and involuntary, felt like the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. Later that morning, Graham had his assistant arrange a discreet meeting with a child advocacy attorney. If he was going to bring the girls to the wedding, even as a symbolic gesture, he needed to protect them first. Background checks, emergency guardianship. The process would take time, weeks, maybe longer, but the wedding was in 5 days. The lawyer, a sharp, gray-haired woman named Madeline Bishop, listened patiently as Graham explained the situation. She'd heard stranger stories, but even she looked surprised when he admitted, "I want to bring them to a wedding, not to make a statement, just to give them one day of being seen, dressed up, safe, loved. Madeline gave him a long, measured look. Then let's get them ready, and let's do it carefully. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Graham arranged for a private pediatrician to visit. Both girls were malnourished, but otherwise healthy. A stylist came next, taking measurements and consulting Hazel on colors. "Nothing pink," she said flatly. "That's for babies." Hope chose lavender, excitedly twirling in front of the mirror when she thought no one was watching. When Graham asked if there was anyone he could contact, any family member, any emergency contact, Hazel's face went blank. "No one," she said simply. "It's been just us for a long time." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but Graham could hear the ache beneath it. He didn't press further. Not yet. That night, as the girls settled into bed, Hope called out, "Graham." He paused in the doorway. "Yes? Do you think people can get second chances?" His heart clenched at the innocence in her voice. "I think second chances are the best kind, because when they happen, they're a choice." Hope smiled, curling under the covers. Hazel, from the other bed, said nothing. But her eyes lingered on Graham longer than usual before she turned away. The following day, Graham met with Madeline again. The paperwork for temporary guardianship was underway. It wasn't airtight, but it was enough. For now. Legally, they could attend the wedding under his supervision. As he drove back through the city with the girls in the back seat, watching the skyscrapers rise around them, Graham realized this had already become much more than a symbolic gesture. He wasn't just preparing them for one afternoon of spectacle. He was preparing for something longer, something real, and yet there was still the matter of Julianne. He hadn't seen her in nearly 5 years. The last conversation they had ended in tears and slammed doors. He remembered her voice when she left. Cold. Final. "I need a family, Graham. A real one. I won't apologize for that." But what if family had found him anyway, in a way neither of them could have expected? As the city lights flickered on and the girls chatted softly behind him, Hazel asking why lakes freeze, Hope humming an off-key lullaby, Graham Whitaker, billionaire, heartbroken, and once certain he'd never be a father, began to believe in something he hadn't for a long time: redemption. And this time, he wouldn't be walking into Julianne's world alone. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear. The Boston skyline gleaming like polished silver beneath a pale winter sun. Graham stood at the edge of his floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the city stir to life. Down the hall, he could hear the quiet hum of voices. Hazel giving Hope instructions on how to tie her sash, the occasional giggle when something went wrong. There was something surreal about it all, like waking up inside a life he never imagined he'd have. Or deserve. He had chosen their dresses carefully. Nothing overdone, nothing loud. Hazel's was a deep forest green that brought out the subtle amber flecks in her eyes, elegant and simple. Hope's was softer, a pale lilac that made her look like she belonged in a fairy tale. Their hair had been braided the night before by a kind stylist Graham had known for years. This morning, he had arranged for them to wear small silver lockets. Nothing extravagant, but meaningful. Inside each, a tiny engraved quote: "You are seen. You are safe. You are loved." By 11 a.m., the car was waiting outside. Graham took one last look in the mirror, adjusted his tie, and turned to face the girls. Hazel stood beside Hope, holding her hand. There was a nervous tightness around her mouth, but her chin was lifted in defiance. Hope bounced slightly in place, excitement barely contained. "Are you ready?" he asked. Hope nodded immediately. Hazel took a beat longer. "We remember what we practiced," she said quietly. "We're your nieces from out of town." "Exactly," Graham said with a smile. "But more importantly, you're my guests, and no one gets to question that." The ride to the venue was quiet. Graham could feel the weight of what was coming settle over the back seat like a slow fog. The event was being held at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, one of Boston's most iconic hotels, grand, ornate, and very public. He had avoided thinking about Julianne's reaction, but now it was unavoidable. The girls leaned into the windows, watching as sleek cars pulled up to the entrance. Flash bulbs flickered. Women in gowns stepped onto crimson carpets. Men adjusted cufflinks and lapels. It was a different world. One Graham had spent years navigating, but which had never felt quite as alien as it did now. Inside the marble lobby, the crowd swelled. Champagne flutes floated by on silver trays. Musicians tuned their instruments softly in the distance. Guests milled about in curated clusters, discussing stocks and ski vacations, oblivious to the human stories pulsing beneath all the elegance. Then, as Graham stepped forward with Hazel and Hope on either side of him, something shifted. People turned. Eyes lingered. Whispered questions trailed behind them. Graham didn't flinch. He moved slowly, deliberately, one hand resting lightly on Hope's shoulder. Hazel walked tall beside him, her expression unreadable. He spotted Julianne across the ballroom, radiant in her champagne-colored gown, surrounded by well-wishers. Her laughter floated through the air like crystal wind chimes. Then her eyes found him. The color drained from her face. It was a split second, her reaction, but Graham caught it. The confusion, the disbelief, and something else, recognition. She excused herself from the group, weaving toward him with a glass of white wine still clutched in her hand. As she approached, her gaze flicked between the girls and Graham with increasing sharpness. "Graham," she said, voice taut, "I didn't expect to see you here. You invited me," he replied calmly. "I didn't think you'd actually come." He smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But plans changed." Julianne's eyes dropped to Hazel and Hope. "And who are these?" Before Graham could speak, Hazel stepped forward with remarkable grace. "I'm Hazel. This is my sister, Hope. We're Graham's nieces." Julianne blinked. "I didn't know you had any siblings." "I didn't either," Hazel said flatly, then smiled with disarming sweetness. Julianne flinched. Graham placed a steadying hand on her back. "They're my guests today. I hope that's not a problem." Julianne recovered quickly, too quickly. "Of course not," she said, but her voice had gone brittle. "I just wasn't expecting surprises." As she walked away, Graham noticed the tight grip she had on her wine glass, her knuckles pale. The girls stood silently beside him. Hope leaned into his side. Hazel's face was a mask. "You did well," he whispered. "You were perfect." "I don't like her," Hope said quietly. "She looked at us like we were bugs." "She's just surprised," Graham replied. But even he didn't quite believe it. They took their seats at a table near the back, away from the VIPs. From a distance, they watched the rest of the guests arrive. Investors, politicians, family members Graham had once dined with. None of them came to say hello. But he didn't care. His focus was on the two girls beside him, who were trying their best not to look afraid. As the ceremony music began, Hazel reached for his hand beneath the table. He took it, gently, grounding her. Whatever came next, questions, whispers, even confrontation, he was ready. And for the first time in his life, Graham Whitaker realized he wasn't just standing for himself anymore. He was standing for them. The ceremony unfolded with flawless precision. String quartets swelled beneath vaulted ceilings, and vows were exchanged beneath a cascade of orchids that hung like snow. Guests dabbed at tears, applauded at the appropriate moments, and smiled with the practiced poise expected of people used to expensive celebrations and public affection. Graham, however, barely registered any of it. He was watching Hazel and Hope. Hope sat wide-eyed, mesmerized by the music. Her small fingers curled into Graham's. Every time someone applauded, she clapped a beat too late, then looked up at him to check if it was okay. He always nodded and gave her a gentle smile. Hazel, on the other hand, was still. Too still. Her eyes flickered around the room constantly, not with curiosity, but calculation. Like someone mapping exits, he recognized it. The instinct of someone who had lived in uncertainty for too long. And then, just before the reception began, it happened. A woman in a crimson silk gown leaned toward the man beside her and whispered something while pointing subtly at their table. Moments later, a ripple passed through the guests closest to them. A slow, poisonous trickle of suspicion and assumption. Graham knew that look, the quiet scandal of the social elite. They wouldn't confront him. They wouldn't dare. But the glances would grow bolder, the whispers louder. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, probably messages from business associates wondering what exactly he was doing here with two girls no one had ever seen before. He ignored it. As servers prepared to open the ballroom for the reception dinner, he guided the girls to their table. It was tucked in the corner, the least visible spot, clearly assigned as an afterthought. But Hazel took it in stride, sliding into her seat and helping Hope with her chair. Then, just as Graham was reaching for his water glass, a shadow fell over their table. Julianne, and beside her stood a man. Graham had never met, but immediately recognized. Callum Stratton, the groom. Callum was tall, square-jawed, and reeked of privilege. He smiled down at Graham in a way that wasn't a smile at all. "Graham Whitaker," Callum said smoothly. "Julianne's told me surprisingly little about you." Graham rose slowly. Likewise, Julianne's expression was unreadable, but her gaze lingered on the girls. "I thought we should come say hello. I didn't get to speak to your nieces." Graham gave her a look that held a warning. "This is Hazel and Hope." Hope waved shyly. Hazel said nothing, but her shoulders squared ever so slightly. Julianne smiled, the kind of smile that cut without raising its voice. "They're lovely. Where are their parents?" "Not here," Graham replied calmly. "I imagine not," Callum added, eyeing Hazel with faint curiosity. "They look remarkably polished." Hazel's mouth twitched. "We've been to a wedding before." Callum blinked. Julianne's lips thinned. Graham stepped slightly forward, subtly placing himself between the girls and the couple. "Is there something you need?" Julianne hesitated, her mask cracking for just a breath. "Are you really doing this, Graham? Using children to get back at me?" Hazel's head snapped toward her. "He's not using us." The room went still. Julianne's brow arched. "Excuse me?" Hazel stood. Her voice was quiet, but it rang with something stronger than volume. Truth. "We're not props. And he didn't make us come. We chose to." Graham placed a hand on her arm gently. "It's okay, Hazel. But Hazel's eyes stayed locked on Julianne. You don't get to talk to him like that. He's been nothing but kind. Callum looked amused. Well, she certainly has a spine. She has more than that, Graham said, his voice cool. She has every reason to speak her mind, and I'd suggest you listen. Julianne's cheeks flushed, but she recovered quickly. This isn't over, Graham. No, he said. It really is. As they walked away, Hazel sat back down, her fingers trembling slightly. Hope reached across and took her hand. You were amazing, she whispered. Hazel didn't answer, but Graham saw the faintest sheen in her eyes. Dinner began. The girls navigated the multiple forks and formalities with a grace that stunned even Graham. He watched them answer polite questions from elderly table-mates, nod respectfully to servers, and thank the sommelier when he poured sparkling water into their flutes. And yet, beneath it all, he could feel something stirring, something unspoken. He leaned toward Hazel between courses. You don't have to tell me, he said softly. But I know there's more. I can feel it. Hazel didn't look at him, but her voice was barely a breath. Not yet, he nodded. Whenever you're ready. She finally glanced up at him. Why are you doing this? Because I couldn't protect the people I loved before, he said honestly. And I won't fail again. Hazel looked at him for a long time, and something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. That night, as the reception turned to dancing and cake, Graham found himself watching not the bride or the groom, but two girls who had walked into his life with nothing but caution and quiet pain, and who, without trying, had turned everything upside down, and he wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. The next morning dawned with a Seattle fog so thick it blurred the city skyline into watercolors. Graham sat by the expansive windows of his penthouse, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, his mind still replaying the events of the wedding. Not Julianne's glare or Callum's smugness, but Hazel's voice, clear, steady, and protective. That moment had pierced deeper than he expected. He hadn't planned for this to become personal, but it had. When Hazel and Hope emerged from their guest room, wrapped in oversized bathrobes and damp hair from their showers, Graham smiled gently. Sleep okay? He asked. Hope nodded, yawning as she hugged her bear. Hazel simply gave a small shrug, her usual armor settling into place. I was thinking, Graham said, keeping his tone light. Since it's Saturday, maybe you'd both like a change of scenery. Hope's face lit up. Like an adventure? Hazel raised an eyebrow. What kind of scenery? He leaned forward, conspiratorially. There's a coastal house I rarely use anymore. Quiet, lots of space, even a small garden. Thought it might be a good place to breathe. Hazel considered it for a moment, then gave the faintest nod. Okay. By early afternoon, they were driving along the coastline, the air cool and salty as waves danced just beyond the road. Hope sang softly in the back seat. Hazel stared out the window, silent but not tense. The beach house was modest by Graham's standards, but to the girls, it might as well have been a palace. Wooden beams, a fireplace, shelves lined with books, and wide windows that opened to crashing waves. Hope ran from room to room in delighted awe, while Hazel walked slowly, examining every corner like she was still waiting for the catch. There's no cameras here, she said finally. No, Graham agreed. There's no one watching, no one to impress, just space. Hope returned, with seashells already gathered from the porch. Can we stay here forever? Graham laughed softly. Let's start with the weekend. They settled into a routine surprisingly quickly. Graham cooked, badly, which made the girls laugh. Hazel showed a knack for organizing, rearranging the kitchen drawers without being asked. Hope colored pictures of lighthouses and wild horses and left them like treasures on Graham's nightstand. And at night, when the fire was low and shadows danced across the wooden ceiling, Graham listened. Not just to their words, but to what wasn't being said. On the third evening, as the wind howled outside, Hazel approached him. Hope had already gone to bed, her bear tucked under her arm. "We can't go back," Hazel said quietly, standing in the doorway. "I know," Graham said, setting aside the book he wasn't really reading. "You want to know everything, right?" He nodded once. She crossed her arms, her voice tightening. "Our mom died 2 years ago. Car accident. We were with her." Graham's breath caught. "I'm sorry." Hazel didn't acknowledge the sympathy. After that, we stayed with her boyfriend. Not for long. He had no legal rights. CPS stepped in. We got bounced around. One foster home after another. "And your father?" Graham asked gently. Hazel shook her head. "Don't know. Never met him. Mom wouldn't talk about him. And the streets?" She looked him in the eye. "Better than the last place they put us." Graham didn't push. Her silence filled in the rest. He swallowed hard. "Hazel, no child should go through what you and Hope have." Her voice wavered then, just slightly. "We don't need pity. We need safety." "That's it." "You have it," Graham said firmly, "as long as you want it." Hazel stared at him, uncertainty flickering behind her eyes. "Why are you doing this? Really?" He leaned forward. "Because I know what it means to want a family and be told you'll never have one. And because when I saw you two that night in the rain, it felt like a beginning." She blinked fast, once, twice. Then she turned and disappeared down the hall. The next morning, Graham found a folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter. Hazel's handwriting, small and careful. "We'll stay, for now." That was all. But to Graham, it meant everything. He looked out the window toward the sea, where the horizon blurred into light, and felt for the first time in years like maybe he wasn't just watching life go by. Maybe he was finally part of it. By midweek, the coastal air had begun to work its quiet magic on them all. Hope laughed more freely now, her drawings brighter, more detailed. Hazel, still cautious, had relaxed enough to accept Graham's help with schoolwork. She even let him teach her how to make omelets, though she refused to admit she enjoyed it. For Graham, the days felt unfamiliar in the best way, filled with purpose, unpredictability, and, for the first time in years, connection. But peace has a way of attracting storms. On Thursday morning, Graham's phone lit up with a call from his assistant, Nora. He answered quickly, stepping onto the deck where the waves crashed against the shore. "There's something you need to see," she said without greeting. "It's already trending." She sent a link. Graham tapped it, and a news article flashed across his screen. "Reclusive millionaire attends wedding with mystery children. Sources say they're not his." Beneath the headline was a grainy photo of him with Hazel and Hope outside the Harrington estate. He scrolled further. Julianne's name appeared in the second paragraph. "She told reporters you showed up with borrowed sympathy to upstage her wedding," Nora added. "She said she's concerned for the girls' welfare." Graham felt his chest tighten. "Is she threatening custody action?" "She's hinting," Nora replied. "And you know how these things snowball. If CPS gets involved—" "I need time," he cut in. "Can you find out who leaked the photo?" already looking. As Graham ended the call, the door behind him creaked open. Hazel stepped out, barefoot on the cold deck, arms crossed against the wind. "You're mad," she said, eyeing his clenched jaw. "Not at you." She glanced at the phone still in his hand. "Is it because of her? The woman from the wedding?" He nodded slowly. "She's stirring things up." Hazel leaned against the railing. She looked fake, like she cared more about her shoes than people. Graham chuckled despite himself. "She used to be different." "People change," Hazel said. "Or maybe they just show you who they really are." Later that afternoon, Graham received another message, this time from Julianne herself. A short, clipped note. "We need to talk before I make this public." He debated ignoring it, but part of him knew. Avoiding Julianne would only make things worse. He agreed to meet her in a neutral space, a hotel lounge in downtown Seattle. He left Hope and Hazel with Nora, who'd agreed to drive out and stay the night. When he entered the lounge, Julianne was already seated, a glass of white wine in her manicured hand, her expression a calculated mix of concern and contempt. "You're late," she said without looking up. "I came, didn't I?" Graham replied, sitting opposite her. She gave him a long, assessing stare. "You've changed. Everyone does." She leaned forward, voice cool. "Let me be blunt. What you pulled at my wedding was disgusting. Parading those girls around to play the victim. They're not props," he said sharply. "They're people." Julianne waved her hand. "Whatever emotional attachment you think you've formed, it won't matter when the state starts asking questions." "What are you talking about?" "I filed an anonymous concern with Child Protective Services," she said, too smoothly. "You brought two unsupervised minors to a high-profile event, introduced them as relatives, and there's no record of legal guardianship. That's a red flag." Graham stood abruptly. "You did this out of spite," she shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe because I care about those children more than you realize. If they're homeless or vulnerable, they need professionals, not a man trying to relive the fatherhood he'll never have." Graham's voice dropped. "Be very careful, Julianne. You're playing with people's lives." "I'm playing the game you started," she snapped. He left without another word. That night, back at the coastal house, Graham sat alone on the porch. The moonlight carved silver paths across the ocean, but his thoughts were dark. Inside, the girls slept unaware. But for how long? Hazel appeared silently at the door, like she'd sensed the storm returning. "She's coming for us, isn't she?" she asked. Graham hesitated, then nodded. "She made a call." Hazel didn't flinch. "So what do we do?" He looked at her. This child who had already lived a dozen lives too many. "We fight," he said simply. "But not by running. We do this smart. Legally. Publicly. If we must." Hazel nodded once. "We've run before. We're tired of hiding." Graham felt a strange surge of hope at her words. Maybe, just maybe, the very thing Julianne tried to destroy was becoming something stronger than either of them expected. A real family, worth fighting for. The following morning arrived with a heavy fog cloaking the coast, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Graham woke before dawn, his mind tangled in thoughts he couldn't untangle. The threat Julianne posed wasn't just personal anymore. It was a legal ticking bomb. He paced the kitchen, listening to the kettle hiss, the silence around him far too loud. When Hazel entered, her expression was unreadable, as always, but Graham could sense the tension in her shoulders. "I heard you pacing," she said quietly. Didn't sleep? Not much. Hazel opened the fridge and took out milk for cereal. She's serious about calling CPS, isn't she? She already did, Graham replied, not sugarcoating the truth. But we're not powerless. I've got someone working on it. Who? A friend, and a very good lawyer. Later that morning, Nora arrived with a woman in her 40s, tall, confident, and wearing a tailored navy suit. Her name was Emily Vargas, a family attorney with a reputation for taking on tough custody battles and winning them. Graham introduced her to Hazel and Hope over tea and banana bread in the sunroom. I know this must be overwhelming, Emily began gently, but I'm here to make sure you're both safe and that no one takes you somewhere you don't want to go. Hazel narrowed her eyes. You work for him, right? She pointed to Graham. I do, Emily replied, but I'm also here for you. My job is to help people tell the truth in a way the courts can't ignore. Hope piped up. Are we in trouble? Not even close, Emily said with a smile. But someone who doesn't understand your story, is trying to pretend they know what's best for you. We're going to stop that, she turned to Graham. But we need more than just heartfelt statements. We need proof of intent. Why you're the right guardian. Why she's not. I have emails, Graham said, pulling out his phone. From Julianne, threatening to go public, trying to manipulate me. And a few witnesses from the wedding saw what really happened. Emily nodded. Good. That's a start. Hazel, who had remained silent, finally spoke. If we tell our story, will that matter? About where we came from? It could matter a lot, Emily answered, but it's up to you what you share. Hazel exchanged a glance with her sister, who simply nodded. We weren't always on the street, Hazel began. Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. Our mom was sick. Cancer. Dad left a long time before that. We bounced around relatives until there weren't any left who wanted us. Hope clutched her sister's arm. Then the shelter. Then the streets. Hazel's tone shifted, hardening with memory. But we took care of each other. We stayed clean. We read books in libraries. We tried. We didn't choose to be forgotten. There was a silence as Emily processed what she'd just heard. She leaned forward, gently. Would you be willing to record a video statement together, just in case things go public? Hazel didn't hesitate. Yes. If she's going to try and make us seem like pawns, then we should speak for ourselves. The next 48 hours passed in a blur. Emily recorded both girls in a quiet corner of the house, asking simple, heartfelt questions. Who are you? What do you want? What does Graham mean to you? Hope answered first. He makes me feel safe. I can sleep all night now. Before him, I couldn't. Hazel followed. He doesn't try to fix us. He just shows up. That's more than most people ever did. By the third day, Graham received word that Julianne had scheduled a press interview. She was spinning the narrative fast. Concerned ex-fiancée trying to protect two vulnerable children from emotional manipulation. The headlines wrote themselves. But Graham and Emily were ready. They posted the girls' video statement online with a simple caption, "Let them tell their own story." Within hours, the video gained traction. Viewers were struck by the girls' honesty, their courage, their raw emotion. Hashtags began trending. Let them stay. Truth over image. Family is chosen. And then the phone rang. It was a local news outlet asking for an interview. Not with Graham, but with Hazel and Hope. Emily hung up and turned to the girls. You've started something. People are listening now. You don't have to do anything more if you don't want to. But if you do, this might be the moment that changes everything. Hazel looked at Hope. Hope looked at Graham. And for the first time, Hazel smiled. Let's finish what we started. The interview studio was smaller than Hazel expected. Bright lights, a single camera, a quiet crew. Yet her heartbeat pounded like she was stepping on stage at Madison Square Garden. Hope sat beside her on the modest love seat, her legs barely dangling over the edge. Across from them, the host, a warm-faced woman in her 40s named Maria Delgado, smiled gently. We'll keep this easy, Maria promised. Just your truth. Speak from your heart. You two ready? Hazel nodded once. Hope gave a small thumbs up. The camera light blinked red. They were live. Maria began softly. Today, we're speaking with Hazel and Hope Whitaker, two young sisters whose story has captured the attention of thousands after a recent video revealed their journey from homelessness to a new life under the care of tech entrepreneur Graham West. She turned slightly. Hazel, can you tell us what life was like before you met Graham? Hazel sat straighter. It was quiet and hard. We didn't really have a home, just places we slept for a while. Sometimes people helped. Sometimes they didn't. But we had each other. Maria nodded. And Hope? What did it feel like when you first met Graham? Hope hesitated, glancing up at her sister. Hazel gave an encouraging smile. He felt like a good person, Hope said simply. He didn't treat us like we were dirty or broken. He didn't ask why we were alone. He just made sure we weren't hungry. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes, but her voice stayed steady. There are a lot of adults watching this who are asking the same question. Why does this man matter so much to you? Hazel answered. Because he didn't have to care. He's rich, important. He could have just walked past, but he didn't. He made room for us. He saw us. And he never once made us feel like a burden. Hope added, he reads with me every night, even when he's tired. Maria paused. There's been some controversy. Someone from Graham's past has raised questions about your relationship with him. Is there anything you want to say to people doubting what you found together? Hazel's voice was clear. We know what it looks like from the outside, but we're not being used, and he's not using us. People think because we don't have parents, we don't have choices, but we do. And we choose him. The clip went viral within hours. Sikachir, we choose. Him began trending across platforms. Comments flooded in. Parents, teachers, even former foster kids, echoing their support. The raw truth of two children standing up for the man who gave them a sense of family struck a national chord. But not everyone was moved by it. 2 days later, a formal legal petition was filed by Julianne Chambers, citing emotional exploitation and requesting emergency custody of the girls on behalf of an unnamed family foundation. The paperwork alleged Graham's actions were driven by image rehabilitation, not altruism. When the notice arrived at Graham's front door, Hazel was the one who opened it. She scanned the legal letter, her face unreadable, then handed it silently to Graham. She's not going to stop, is she? She asked. No, Graham admitted, but neither will I. A court date was set. As preparations began, a surprising message arrived. Julianne would be appearing on a morning show for an exclusive interview. Emily immediately flagged it. She's controlling the narrative again, she warned. We need to counter it. But Hazel shook her head. We already said what we needed to say. If people want to believe her, let them. The only person we have to convince now is the judge. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Press wasn't allowed inside, but interest was high. Judge Miriam Walsh, known for her fierce commitment to children's welfare, presided. Julianne arrived in a muted designer dress, flanked by two attorneys. Her face held the perfect blend of concern and poise. She made her argument with practiced elegance, painting herself as a concerned figure worried about two vulnerable girls thrust into media chaos. But then Emily rose. Her tone was calm, her presence unshakable. What we have here is not a question of financial security. It's not about optics. It's about consistency, about care, and about connection. She turned toward Hazel and Hope, seated beside Graham. These girls have lived through more loss than most adults ever will. They didn't ask for fame. They didn't seek out attention. They wanted a roof, a warm bed, and someone to say goodnight to them. Graham West gave them that. Judge Walsh raised a hand. I'd like to hear from the girls directly. Hazel stood. She wasn't nervous this time. We know people think we're a story, a headline, she said. But we're just kids, and we've had enough of being moved around. Graham never asked us to love him, but we do. And we're not asking for permission to stay. We're asking to be heard. Hope stood beside her, chin high. He's our home. In the silence that followed, the sound of the gavel felt like thunder. We'll reconvene in 48 hours for a final ruling, the judge said. But know this, your voices are not just heard, they matter. The hours after the courtroom hearing were a blur. The media buzzed with speculation, but inside Graham's home, a heavy quiet had settled over the penthouse. The tension of waiting, not just for the court's ruling, but for what it would mean, hung in the air like fog that wouldn't lift. Hazel sat curled in the corner of the couch, sketching silently in her notebook, while Hope lay on the floor nearby, building towers from wooden blocks Graham had bought on a whim weeks earlier. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. Their silence wasn't distance. It was resilience. Graham stood in the kitchen, watching them, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. He'd never felt so helpless. With all the resources he had, money, lawyers, influence, none of it guaranteed the one thing he now cared about most, keeping those two girls safe. Emily entered quietly, tablet in hand, her expression unreadable. She's launching a final media push, she said, referring to Julianne Chambers. Morning segments, op-eds, even an interview with a parenting magazine claiming you emotionally manipulated the girls for attention. Graham let out a bitter breath. She's not trying to win in court anymore. She's trying to destroy me publicly in case she loses. Emily nodded, and she knows exactly how to spin it. Hazel looked up from her sketch pad. Let her talk. Emily and Graham turned. She can say whatever she wants, Hazel continued, her voice calm. We already told the truth. That truth had spread further than they realized. The interview clip from Maria Delgado's show had reached over 4 million views. Hundreds of messages poured in. Former foster kids, adoptive parents, and strangers offering everything from support to legal advice. And then, just as the world seemed to be choosing sides, something changed. A quiet knock came at the door. Graham opened it to find a woman in her 60s, wearing a simple gray cardigan and glasses, standing beside a teenage boy with tightly curled hair and nervous eyes. My name is Deborah Kane, the woman said gently. I'm a retired social worker, and this is Jordan, one of my former cases. He asked me to bring him here. Jordan stepped forward, clutching something in his hands. I I used to live with Julianne Chambers, he said, his voice cracking. She took me in 2 years ago, said she wanted to save me. Hazel and Hope stood now, eyes wide. She didn't hurt me, Jordan said quickly. Not like that, but she didn't love me either. I was a project until I got too old, or too angry, or too loud. Then she gave me back to the system. He held out a letter, written in his shaky teenage handwriting, signed and notarized. A statement, a testimony. I want the judge to know who she really is. Graham's throat tightened. He reached for the boy's hand, gripping it firmly. Thank you. The next morning, in court, Deborah and Jordan were called to speak. It wasn't part of the original hearing plan, but Judge Walsh allowed it, recognizing the gravity of the testimony. Jordan stood tall as he spoke about his year with Julianne, how she controlled every aspect of his life, used him for charitable publicity, and discarded him when he didn't fit her narrative. She told me I should be grateful, he said quietly. But I was never loved. I was managed. When he finished, silence filled the courtroom. Julianne's attorney tried to object, but it was too late. The damage was done. In the final statements, Emily spoke not just as Graham's counsel, but as a witness to the transformation in the home. I've seen what a family looks like when it's formed by choice, she said. And I've seen what it looks like when it's built for show. These girls know the difference. And so do we. Finally, Judge Walsh rose from the bench. This is not a decision I take lightly, she began. But what became clear during these proceedings is that family is not about image. It's about presence, consistency, and love. She turned to Graham. Mr. West, I find no evidence of coercion or harm in your relationship with the minors Hazel and Hope Whitaker. On the contrary, I see proof of care, structure, and emotional safety. She turned to the girls. Hazel, Hope, this court formally grants legal guardianship to Mr. Graham West, with full adoption proceedings approved pending final review. Hope let out a sob of relief. Hazel didn't move at first. Then suddenly, she burst into tears. Not from fear, not from grief, but from something she hadn't dared to feel in a very long time. Security. She turned and threw her arms around Graham as Hope followed, the three of them folding into one tight, breathless, trembling embrace. A family, made not from blood, but from choice. Made not from obligation, but from love. The weeks that followed the final ruling felt like the slow unwinding of a storm. No cameras, no court dates, no threats of custody battles hanging over their heads like thunderclouds. Instead, the quiet hum of real life began to settle in. For the first time, Graham West didn't wake up thinking about how to defend something. He woke up thinking about breakfast, school drop-offs, and whether Hope had remembered her sweater. The penthouse, once a pristine bachelor fortress of glass and steel, had become something else entirely. Color, laughter, art supplies in places where spreadsheets used to be. And the most surprising part? He didn't miss the old version. One Saturday morning, Graham stood at the stove, flipping blueberry pancakes, Hope's favorite. Hazel sat at the counter, poring over a library book twice the size of her head, occasionally scribbling notes into a worn leather journal he'd bought her on a whim. The twins were thriving, but not in a flashy way. It was in the way Hope no longer flinched when someone raised their voice. It was in the way Hazel no longer sat closest to the door, just in case she needed to run. Their healing was quiet, but constant, like ivy crawling up the side of a house, slow, but impossible to ignore. That afternoon, they visited Graham's parents in Carmel. It was the twins' first time meeting them officially, though Graham's mother, Evelyn, had already sent a series of over-the-top care packages since the adoption was finalized. Evelyn greeted the girls with hugs, homemade cookies, and a bedroom she'd redecorated herself. 2 twin beds, shelves lined with books, and a mural of cherry blossoms on the wall. Graham had warned her to keep it simple. Evelyn, of course, had done the opposite. "It's like a princess cottage," Hope whispered, running her fingers along the soft pink comforter. Hazel stood still, blinking back emotion she didn't want anyone to see. Later, they all sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the coast, wrapped in blankets. Graham's father, Martin, handed Hazel a steaming mug of cocoa and asked about the book she was reading. She lit up in a way Graham rarely saw, talking not just about the story, but the symbolism, the metaphors. His father nodded with quiet pride, not interrupting once. Hope, meanwhile, had fallen asleep in Evelyn's lap, a half-eaten cookie in her hand. It was ordinary, and it was everything. That night, Graham tucked them into bed in the guest room. As he turned to leave, Hazel spoke. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" He knew who she meant. Julianne hadn't made another move. The courts had closed the case. The media had moved on. But for Hazel, the past wasn't a thing you simply erased with a gavel and a signature. "She might," Graham said honestly. "But if she does, she won't get close. Not to you. Not to Hope. Not ever again." Hazel nodded slowly, then surprised him. She wasn't the worst part. Graham turned back. What was? Not knowing if anyone would believe us. He swallowed hard. "I will. Every time. Even when it's messy. Even when it's hard." Hazel's face softened. "I know." And that was it. No grand gestures. No dramatic music. Just a quiet moment of trust, rebuilt. Back in the kitchen, Graham sat with his mother as she poured him a second cup of tea. They didn't speak for a while. The silence was comfortable. "You're a good father," Evelyn said at last. "I'm just learning as I go." That's what all the best ones do. When they returned to the city the next day, Hazel and Hope burst through the front door like they'd never left. Hope immediately pulled out her colored pencils and started a new drawing. A family of 3 standing in front of a house with a heart-shaped chimney. Hazel, predictably, returned to her reading nook. Graham sat on the couch, watching them, and something stirred in his chest. Not pride, not even relief, but something deeper. A kind of peace he hadn't known he was missing. He thought of how it all started. A bitter wedding invitation, an impulsive act, 2 girls in the rain, and how those very things led him here. To something that wasn't perfect, but was real. A second chance he hadn't asked for, but would protect with everything he had. For the first time, Graham West didn't feel like he was alone at the top of some cold glass tower. He felt like a man with a home and a heart that finally had somewhere to rest. From a cold skyscraper office to a home filled with laughter, the journey of Graham West, Hope, and Hazel is nothing short of extraordinary. What began as a moment of emotional retaliation, a man bringing 2 homeless girls to his ex-fiancée's wedding, evolved into one of the most touching and unexpected stories of chosen family, redemption, and healing. Graham, once defined by boardroom battles and corporate victories, had long believed his inability to have children meant he was destined to walk through life alone. But two small strangers changed everything. Hope and Hazel, sisters bound by loss and survival, carried more than just their backpacks when they walked into Graham's penthouse. They carried stories of abandonment, betrayal, and forced silence. Yet despite the harshness of their past, they never lost their innate strength. Hope's innocence and instinct to trust. Hazel's guarded brilliance and loyalty. These became the twin pillars that transformed Graham's world from sterile perfection into meaningful chaos. Graham didn't save them. They saved each other. Through courtrooms, media storms, and emotional truths that slowly peeled back with time. The heart of this story lies in the idea that family isn't always blood. It's about the people who choose to stay, who show up when it matters most, who fight for you when no one else will. For Graham, being a father didn't come from biology. It came from bedtime routines, Sunday pancakes, and being the anchor Hazel and Hope so desperately needed. The deeper lesson here? Life rarely gives us what we expect, but sometimes it gives us what we need. Sometimes the people we are meant to protect also end up saving us in return. Whether you've built walls to protect yourself or feel like you've missed your chance at something meaningful, love, connection, purpose, know this: it's never too late to open the door. Apply that in your life. Reach out to someone. Say yes to the unexpected. Listen more. Judge less. And when the moment comes where you're called to be more than what you thought you were capable of, step forward. You never know whose life, including your own, might change because of it. Now, we want to hear from you. Quiz time. What was the original reason Graham West took the girls to his ex-fiancée's wedding? A. He wanted to make a powerful, generous gesture to help them. B. He initially wanted to make a point to his ex and appear strong after being left. Comment A or B below. We're excited to see what you remember. Also, we'd love to know, what do you think about Graham's decision to adopt Hope and Hazel? Was it brave, risky, or something else? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep telling powerful stories that move and inspire. See you in the next one.